If you are thinking about ways to turn your poetry into a source of creative and financial independence, that means you're going to have to create something for people with poetry. And I hope you don't make the same mistake that I did. We are going to be talking about the difference between a service and a product, and having a little conversation about what we want to consider with what we create for others that we want to build our life around. So my main business is teaching. I got into teaching because I worked at a language center, and one of the things that happened eventually was I began thinking about, hey, right now I'm working for a language center. What if I taught for myself though? There's lots of students around. I think I could start finding people to work with. And so what I did was, there's a language teaching platform called italki. I made a profile. I started taking on some students during the weekend and things like that. And little did I know that that was actually going to be immensely useful, because I started creating my own kind of online presence right around maybe like a year before things like the dollar became very strong and oil prices went really low. So that means that a lot of international students that I was working with, because I was working as an ESL teacher for a language center, they were disappearing, right? Because they couldn't afford the prices. If you're from Brazil, or if you're from Venezuela, or if you're from Middle Eastern markets and oil prices go down, you don't have as much money. Or if the dollar is really strong, then you lose your Asian market. So a lot of people weren't coming to the US as often as they had in the past to study, among other reasons. And so what eventually happened was the language center I worked at had to close. Thankfully, I had already started teaching online, because if I hadn't done that, then my other option would be to get a job at another language center in the city, but everyone's going through the same problem, right? And so by teaching online, I had already began opening myself up to a larger pool of people, which worked out really well for me. But one of the things that we need to understand about teaching and instruction is that I think from a creative standpoint, I think teaching is going to be a very fundamental concept for you if you're really trying to grow your art, get your name out there, because teaching allows you to explore concepts on your own, begin understanding your own thought processes, and maybe even come up with things that are novel, that the world hasn't seen before, that you can deliver to people and help them on their own individual journeys. The downside of teaching is that if I don't teach, I don't get paid. And the other downside of teaching too is I am limited by the people who can be in my classroom. And one of the things that I've done in creating my teaching business is it's been very much based around teaching. I have individual teaching. I have a pronunciation group on an app called Telegram where people can sign up and I give like pronunciation feedback and things like that. In addition to that, I have several different types of group coaching. The problem with these things is that if I don't show up, I don't get paid. That's part of the agreement, right? And so when we create a service, if you're like, I will work with you for this many months or for an indefinite period of time, it implicitly means that I have to be there to do the thing. This stands in contrast to products. When we think of a product, one thing that the first product that poets typically create is a book, whether it's a chapbook, like a small collection of poems, or a larger full-length collection. This is a product. You're putting it into the market, people can buy it. And the nice thing about products is you can be asleep. You can be sick. You can be at home with your kids, and still the product can be working for you. And this is the big difference. If you create a service, you're on demand. If you create a product, you don't have to necessarily even do anything after the product is out, and it can keep bringing you returns. This is something that I've done in my teaching business. I've created things, for instance, like a YouTube channel, well, a couple of YouTube channels that were able to reach the point where they got monetized, and so they're able to bring in a little bit of income, even if I'm asleep. In addition to that, I created a pronunciation textbook That again is something that I don't even have to market extensively, but every month there's a couple of people buying it and I can check, and it's giving me a little bit of income. And so when we're creating any sort of offer for the world that's going to lead us to creative and financial independence, the thing that I would really ask you to about is not to, discount or ignore services, because services can work out really well. Services are pretty much how I'm able to do everything that I'm able to do. But let's maybe firstly think about what are some products I can bring into the world that can begin serving people in a way that interests them and that they're willing to pay for it as soon as possible. And the nice thing about a product is once it's created, it stays created. You write a book, even if you write a second book, the first book is still there. What are some other sorts of things that you can do with your art, with your writing, with your poetry that can become a product that then can be built on for other products? I'm working in my teaching business. One of the things I'm doing is I'm working with one of my students has an education company, and what we've done is we've created an app, and that app takes some of my videos and instructional materials and gives that to students so they're able to work with it too. And that's not something that once the videos are done I have to be super hands-on with. The videos stay there, the app stays there. If you're a poet, maybe it's creating a book. If you're a poet, maybe it's creating a group, but maybe you're not the face of the group. This is a way that maybe you can connect a product and maybe a service together. There's a book that, I'll be honest, I haven't read directly, but I've been listening to a lot of discussions about, called The E-Myth. And The E-Myth is talking about businesses and creating businesses. What's a huge difference between mom and pop opening a restaurant versus, for instance, like McDonald's opening a restaurant? One of the things you're going to find typically is McDonald's is run so efficiently that a teenager can walk in the doors and be able to run the restaurant. You have this multi-million-dollar business that's being run by people who are under the age of 20. This is possible because you have things like systematized processes in place. So if you do decide, hey, I want to create a service, one issue I've run into is my teaching is specialized. I'm teaching things that most other education, ESL, pronunciation, communication coaches aren't covering, which on the one hand gives me some uniqueness, and it's the reason why many people turn to me. But on the other hand, the difficulty is it's more difficult for me to bring people in to take on some of that teaching load. Also because if I bring in new students, a lot of them are expecting me to be the face of it. Whereas if you're able to create a service that from the onset, you're not the primary focus, but maybe someone else is, well, then you can stay in the background and focus on bringing people in or letting people know about it without necessarily being tied to your own hours. One example of this, so we have an online community called The Substation. It's where people, for people who pay, we have a section where people can submit poems for review, for peer review, in a private way, so that way the poems aren't considered published. And it's focused because, hey, people are paying a little bit of money, so that means that they're serious about it, and so they're taking in the time to submit pieces for peer review. We also have like a weekly live stream as part of it. One of the things I'm shifting soon with it is I'm in the process of bringing on a couple of other poetry instructors, poets who have experience in the field with publishing, with editing, with success and names in the field, bring them on to also help peer review people's poems. So now I'm not the only face giving the primary amount of feedback in addition to the peer review. We're getting these other names that people trust or that people respect in the field, and they're able to get feedback on. That can grow without necessarily me actually adding on a lot of hours for myself. Because here's the thing with a lot of services. If the service is only built around you, you become the bottleneck. If you don't make the time, then you can't get paid. Or if your time gets maxed out, So for instance, if I'm doing group coaching becomes trickier when I have, like, for instance, 15 students in an online classroom. That can be difficult to manage. So I have to limit the groups to, 5 students, 6 students. Well, now I'm capped. I can't take on more students, so I can't, generate more income from that. So this is the thing when we're coming with a service, can we create something that we're not the bottleneck for, that we're able to bring on other people to help with, familiarize themselves with, give them the processes and the procedures that you expect, but then they can take the lead. All of this to say is that if I had to go back on my journey in creating businesses, I would spend a little bit more time at the beginning stages thinking about what is something I can create as a product before focusing myself on what are the services I can bring into the world. Because as soon as you bring a service into the world that's centered on you, you become the limit on what that service can become.